Neil, thank you very much for the introduction and for the welcome here today in Aberdeen. This city that has made such huge contributions to our movement, where Tony Benn's father was once the MP, William Benn, for North Aberdeen, where my great friend Bob Hughes, great anti-apartheid campaigner, was the MP here for a very long time and did such great work in Parliament on many, many issues. And of course the great work done by the trade unions in Aberdeen, not just in the oil industry, but on all the other issues. Tommy very kindly gave me a copy of the Trades Council annual report of 2014, and it's like no other annual report of the Trades Council I've ever seen before. Most Trades Council reports are on 2 sides of paper, and frankly entirely boring. This is not. This is a fascinating document of very vibrant organisation, showing the importance, the value of trade unions and trade union participation in political life. I was a trade union organiser for the National Union of Public Employees before I was made a Member of Parliament in 1983. And I believe very strongly in the connection between the party and the trade unions. I'm not ashamed of that link. I'm absolutely proud of that link, because it's the very lifeblood of anyone who says that trade unions are not relevant. There are lots of big issues where unions make their views known and make demands. I'll give you just one example. There's a page taken out in the annual report by the RMT, Rail, Maritime and Transport Union. And it's about something called ending dumping of sewage on Scotland's railways. There's too many trains, still don't have sewage tanks on the trains, and the raw sewage spews out onto the railway tracks. Passengers probably don't think about it, the management probably doesn't think about it very much, it's just something that happens. What's that like, though, for a track worker, a railway worker, who's got to clear that up? Who's got to work amongst that? And the final line, it says, the RMT has said all along that if it was wealthy bankers getting sprayed with sewage rather than rail workers, this scandal would have been ended overnight. Aren't they right? Well, thanks, Tommy, for that, what you said. And thanks for the support from Unite in this campaign, and also all the other unions, including my own union, Unison, for their nomination and their support. And we have support from the communication workers, and I'm proud to work with them on ensuring that Royal Mail keeps its universal service obligation. Royal Mail is ours, public, forever, as a mail service we can all be proud of, rather than something that's diced up, cut up and sold off to a series of companies that will do the easy bits of delivery, and the rest of the remote places will lose out altogether. There's something very important about universal service obligation, not just in health, but in postal service and so many other areas. Dexter, thanks for what you said, and I can relate entirely to what you said about rent levels and housing. I represent a very different area to Aberdeen. I represent an inner city constituency in London, Islington North, where a combination of excessive rents in the private rented sector, insufficient supply of council housing, and a benefit cap imposed by central government means that many families get placed in the private rented sector when they ought to be placed in council accommodation. I don't blame the council for that. They have no alternative. And the high rents go up and up and up. The benefit cap goes down and down and down, according to the latest bill that's been put before Parliament. And what happens is there's a social cleansing of the poorest from our community to somewhere else in the southeast or even in the English Midlands. What is it like for a child growing up knowing that their flat is there for 6 months until that assured short-hold tenancy is finished, then they move on somewhere else and often have to move school? Cannot we as a society rediscover our decency and our humanity and ensure that every child has a secure place to live, knowing that they're not going to have to move after a few months, knowing they're going to be secure, warm and dry in that flat? It's not a lot to ask in the 4th richest country of the world. We can and should be able to do much better than we do at the present time. I've said a great deal, and I've worked very closely with Katie over many, many years on lots of different issues relating to British politics, relating to international politics, and there was no finer defender of human rights in the most difficult circumstances, such as Saudi Arabia, than Katie, and the work that she did in Parliament and continues to do in all of her life. It's people like her that have brought our movement forward. It's people like her that have made great changes in law, in Parliament, and it's people like her that I hope are going to be back in Parliament in the future, because it's her talent, her skill and her knowledge that is there for all of us to benefit from. Katie, thank you very much, not just for what you said, all the other things you said. This campaign is at one level a campaign for the leadership and deputy leadership of the Labour Party, but it's also something much wider than that. It's not a secret that we had a lot of difficulty getting a name on the ballot paper. We had a discussion, a small number of MPs, about how we would deal with the issues the Labour Party faced after the last election. The loss of seats and votes in Scotland, the loss of votes in England, there were some gains but also some losses, and the fact that it was a Tory overall majority. We felt, and I still feel very strongly, that we lost the election because, whilst there was good stuff in the manifesto, fundamentally the economic message being offered was one of a continuation of austerity, and had a Labour government been elected, and I wish we had, there would have still been a process of cuts in central government expenditure, and relating to that, of course, cuts in national expenditure and local government expenditure in England. Hardly an enticing prospect for a lot of people on 0 hours contracts, low wages, frozen salaries in the public sector. We should, could, must, and I believe will be able to offer an entirely different economic strategy in the future. That is what this campaign is about. What this campaign is not about, and never will be about, is personal abuse, name-calling, calling into question the character of other people or other candidates. I believe many people, particularly young people, are totally turned off the politics of celebrity, personality, personal abuse, name-calling, and all that kind of thing. Let's be adults about it. Let's have a serious debate, serious discussion, serious proposals put forward. The poor, the vulnerable, the weak deserve a political system that works for them and helps them. The rich, the powerful, that benefit so much from our political system don't care what kind of name-calling goes on, providing their tax breaks go on. I've got news for them. We're offering something very, very different in this campaign. And it's gaining amazing levels of support. Neil just pointed out that as of last night, 9,000 people had been in touch with our campaign, offering to be volunteers and to help in this campaign. The numbers of people turning out at meetings and events has been growing and growing. And this, I've lost count exactly, but I think this is about the 70th event that we've done ever since this campaign began, not that many weeks ago. And it is brought together older people who are coming back into Labour politics because they were disillusioned of what was going on in the past, and young people who were not apolitical, absolutely not, but turned off by a party system that didn't say very much to them. They've got involved in this campaign. We're also a very inclusive campaign. We reject absolutely the blaming of minorities, the name-calling, the sotto-voce voices against those that have migrated to this country or sought asylum and refuge in this country. Instead, cannot we be proud to be an inclusive society that values everyone, that values all of humanity, and work forward on that basis of an inclusive, decent society? The fundamental we are making on the economy are basically this. The banking crisis of 2008-9 was not caused by having alleged overspending by that government. Indeed, the spending levels were broadly similar to the levels of spending by Margaret Thatcher and John Major, albeit they spent it on rather different things. It was not caused by the cost of Sure Start or children's centres. It was not caused by the alleged high pay to firefighters, nurses, police officers, or any other public servant. Instead, it was caused by an out-of-control banking system, by the lack of regulation, by the subprime mortgage crisis in the USA, and by the excessive levels of profit-taking by many of our banks, and the utterly ludicrous bonus system that very high-paid bankers receive. I've never quite understood how it is that if somebody is on a low wage in an important job, like cleaning our streets, collecting our refuse, fighting fires, looking after our society through being a social worker or any of those kind of jobs. They do the job, they're proud to do the job, they're proud to be workers working for all of us to do that job. They don't expect or get a bonus at the end of the year. Hopefully they get a wage rise at the end of each year. But apparently, if you're a banker on a telephone number salary ending with at least 6 noughts, you need a very big bonus in order to get out of bed in the morning and go to work at all. And at the end of that year, crashing the organisation you're employed by, you're apparently still given a bonus for trying not to make it crash, if you get my meaning. So I think we need to do a bit of rejigging there. And so when we brought those banks into public ownership in 2009-10, that Parliament, I supported it. In fact, I thought, wow, all my life I've been at Labour Party meetings, starting as a young socialist when I was 16, where people would talk about the importance of bringing the banks into public ownership. And so I rushed into Parliament that evening when this banking bill was going through, thinking, wow, this is the moment. We are taking over the banking system. There was no vote. There was nobody opposed it. I said, yeah, fine, let it go through. And of course it was public ownership, but there's public ownership and public ownership, and then there's another form of public ownership. This was the third one. And this form of public ownership was about buying up the shares in the banks, offering them a soft loan of 325 billion through something called quantitative easing, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And the shares were all placed in a holding company in order that at some point, without any reference to Parliament, any chance of the Exchequer, that one or a future one, would sell off those shares. George Osborne is now selling off our shares in the Royal Bank of Scotland at a loss to his mates in the City of London. Sorry, George, it's our bank, we bought it, we paid for it, and we want and demand that that bank and all the other banks that we invest in work for us, invest in infrastructure, a productive economy, good quality engineering jobs and companies, good quality research, green energy jobs, all the things that we're very good at in all parts of the UK. Instead of advising people how to salt their money away in tax havens or invest in buy-to-let mortgages rather than investing in lifetime housing for everybody. Why don't we instead use our influence over the banking system to expand and develop small and medium-sized enterprises rather than the system we have at the present time? So our suggestion in the economic document, and it's a proposal, it's not the last word, we put forward, is the importance of collecting uncollected tax. My friend Richard Murphy, who helps in this document, estimates at least £50 billion a year is not collected. We tolerate tax havens around the shores of the UK. We tolerate tax havens in other parts of Europe and other parts of the world. Surely, instead of austerity, which hits the poorest the hardest and the rich the least, we should be collecting that tax in as a socially responsible thing to do to fund the services we all need and fund the education we all need for all of our young people. It's not rocket science, it's not difficult, it just requires real political determination to achieve it. Is a national investment bank, which some of my colleagues don't seem to have read the document very carefully, which is about using that quantitative easing to make those investments that are necessary. Think of the way in which we could improve our infrastructure in so many parts of the UK. The way in which the rail service north of the Central Belt in Scotland could be radically improved with much more investment. The way in which electrification of the rail system all across the UK could develop rather than the Chancellor of the Exchequer bizarrely announcing that he was going to electrify the Leeds to Manchester line and the Midland Main Line in England, only to cancel it straight after the election. Sorry, he's put it on what he calls a long-term pause. I think a long-term pause actually means cancellation, but he couldn't spell cancellation. And so there are so many things that we could and should be doing. And there are so many areas in education we could be doing so much better. Instead of losing college places, instead of leaving students in England to finish their university degree course with £50,000 or £60,000 worth of debt, instead of charging parents who can ill afford it preschool places in many parts of the country, cannot we instead, as a labour movement, revalue the point and love of education as a principle, education for life, for all of us. So it's not just about preschool, not just about primary and secondary schools. It's also about removing the debt burden from students in some parts of the UK, but it's also about refunding adult education. So those that maybe didn't do so well at school have a chance to go back, or those who simply want to develop opportunities and careers to do something else. But also value education, not just for qualifications for jobs and work, important as that is, but education is a value to all of us. If somebody is a good engineer, our train is safer. If somebody is a good surveyor, our buildings are safer. We all benefit from the education of everybody else. But I'd also add to that, we also benefit and value from the culture in which we live, the culture in which we grow up. Poverty is such a waste of talent, opportunity and everything else. We're in the middle of this lovely centre here in Aberdeen, this centre of arts for all, this centre where children, irrespective of their talents at acting, can come here and try themselves out on the stage. We're in a place where everyone can express themselves. We put forward a consultative document on arts funding and arts and entertainment and cultural development. Not because it should be a luxurious add-on, not because classical music or art should solely be the preserve of those with enough money to go to classical concerts or able to send their children to private stage schools and things like that, because there's talent in all of us, and because every child needs their imagination opening up, needs those opportunities. Never be afraid of saying there's a poet, there's an artist, there's a dancer, there's an actor in all of us. It helps our society develop. Can't we be proud of cultural diversity rather than leaving it to somebody else? That's why we put forward our document. If you have views on it, please let me have them. Please let other people have them. But above all, let's be proud of the heritage that we've got and the way we develop things. I'd also go on to say, and there's much I could say about health and education and other things, but I say this: if I asked all of you, do you believe in the National Health Service free at the point of use, you'd all say yes. Do you believe it's a human right? You'd all say yes. Do you believe it should be remaining as a human right for all time? You'd all say yes. Then I think back to the bravery of those people that argued for that very principle. And a few days ago, I was in South Wales, in Tredegar, where Nye Bevan was born, and Nye Bevan was the Member of Parliament for many years. And there's a memorial stone to Nye above the town. And we held a health service rally there. And in the windows of Nye Bevan House is a message which says, no civilised society should charge people for the health services they need. Otherwise it could not call itself a civilised society. So he developed a national health service, and he made it national for a reason, because he didn't want it broken up. He didn't want it privatised. He didn't want it dominated by an internal market. And he wanted the principle of healthcare free at the point of use. If this Tory government stays in office for a long time, the NHS in some parts of the UK will be unrecognisable. The internal market will take over. The debates and the competition between various privateers trying to take over health service specialties will dominate, rather than the principle of an NHS free at the point of use for all of us. But, and this is a but that I'm going to share with you, the post-war Labour government, 1945 to 51, achieved many great things, including the principle of a social security system that provided real social security for all. Took the point that a society should care for all its people, whatever they did, whatever their poverty, whatever their situation, and prevent anyone falling into destitution. That was in the Beveridge report. Beveridge was not a socialist, he was a liberal. He wrote it in 1942 and presented it to the wartime Parliament, who debated it. The post-war Labour government implemented most of it, and it later was developed with other pieces of legislation. But we have allowed massive holes to be cut in the welfare state safety net. You travel around the whole of the UK, more and more people sleeping on our streets, more and more people begging, more and more people destitute, many people with mental health problems, ex-soldiers, people that have been through crises in their lives, all kinds of people that have been through all kinds of complications. There, but for the grace of God, go any of us. We could all end up with those complications. We could all end up with those kind of disasters in society. So what kind of society is it when our daily newspapers add the moniker to everything, benefit scrounger, add the moniker to everything, benefit abuser, and things like that? Of course nobody should claim that to not, which they're not entitled. Of course they shouldn't. But cannot we be proud enough to have the humanity enough to say we want to live in a society where we do not allow people to sleep on our streets, where we do provide safety, housing, health and opportunities to work for everybody, whatever their situation in our world? Surely it's something our forefathers fought for, our mothers who went before us fought for. We should be proud of it and be prepared to stand up for it as a Labour Party who introduced these things and achieved so many of these things. That is one of the principles behind the campaign we're putting forward for the leadership of the Labour Party, and why I am absolutely determined that at every stage we'll vote against this welfare reform bill for the damage it's doing to the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. And it was utterly wrong for many Labour MPs to abstain on the second reading of that bill when they should, I believe, all have voted against it, as many of us did on that day. So, the last point I'd make is this. I felt that in the general election, Labour didn't connect on the issues of austerity, didn't connect on the economic policy that was being put forward. I didn't really want a leadership contest straight after the election. I wanted it to be a longer and fuller debate on policy. That was not to be. We're having this leadership election. Whatever the result on September the 12th, and I have no idea what it's going to be, whatever the result, there's got to be a debate about democracy in the Labour Party, about the way in which policy is made. It should not be made by the leader's office and experts sitting around a table somewhere else and putting a top-down policy process. It should come from the grassroots. It should come from party branches, party members, affiliated trade unions, and many other people that have huge expertise. So we're also suggesting policy commissions. A policy commission, an open commission on constitutional issues covering the whole of the UK, powers, funding, taxation levels, yes, but also our democracy. The lack of an elected second chamber in Westminster, the need to abolish the House of Lords and replace it with a democratically elected, accountable chamber. It's simply not right that any Prime Minister or monarch has the right to appoint people to members of Parliament and call them members of the House of Lords. Sorry, it's time for real democracy to take over in the whole of the UK. I'm very thankful. We did not connect was on Trident and on nuclear weapons. I make no bones about it. The first organisation I joined as a young person growing up in the English Midlands in a small country town was the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. I can't say there was a branch of CND in my town because I was the only member. Then my brother joined, so it was two of us. But nevertheless, we made our point, we made our mark. And why? Anyone that has talked to people, and I'm sure some of you have, from Hiroshima and what happened to them in 1945, those that saw the first nuclear explosions, And I had the good fortune, if that's the right word, last year to go to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Treaty Review Conference, and also to the Humanitarian Effects of War Conference. And I met people there from the Marshall Islands in the Pacific. I also met nuclear test veterans from Britain, from Russia, from Australia, from the United States, that were used as human guinea pigs to watch nuclear testing in the 1950s, and are still bearing the cancer scars of that. And their children and their children's children will also suffer because of that. As indeed generation after generation in Japan is suffering the effects of those nuclear explosions. Can there ever be any moral justification for having or being prepared to use a nuclear weapon, knowing it can only indiscriminately kill millions of ordinary, peaceful, peace-loving civilians? And it's very expensive. It will cost, to replace Trident in 2016, £100 billion. That money should not be seen as a cash down payment on anything else. Instead, I think it should be seen as an opportunity to employ people who are currently making nuclear weapons or servicing them or decommissioning them or commissioning them, to turn their skills to other things, to invest in socially responsible work and jobs, to use those brilliant skills to develop the economy for all of us rather than develop those nuclear weapons. When people say nuclear weapons bring you security, it's a very strange logic. There are 190 odd countries members of the United Nations. There are 5 declared nuclear weapon states: Britain, France, China, Russia, and the United States. There are 3 other countries that have nuclear weapons: India, Pakistan, and Israel. There are 2 others that are reputed to possibly have nuclear weapons: North Korea, or possibly be able to manufacture them in the case of Iran. I'm pleased that there's been some level of agreement reached with Iran, and I was pleased to take part in a delegation to Iran last year to both discuss the nuclear issue as well as the human rights abuses that go on in Iran. You have to talk to people, sometimes those you don't agree with, if you're going to try and bring about some real changes, real peace and real human rights in this world. Could not we make a big contribution by saying we will fulfill our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of not renewing Trident in 2016? That is something that I believe an awful lot of people, not just in Scotland, but all across the UK, actually do connect with. They don't want to live in a world of war and danger. They want to live in a world of peace. And there was no more powerful statement made at the Geneva conference than that by Abdul Minty on behalf of the post-apartheid government of South Africa. A man who fought against apartheid all his life and said, we want peace, we want justice, we want democracy, we don't want to threaten our neighbours, we want to live in a nuclear weapons-free continent of Africa. By giving up nuclear weapons, we've achieved that. Who got the applause? Britain, the United States, or South Africa? I think we all know the answer to that question. An election within the Labour Party, yes. It is a debate, yes, but it's also about the kind of politics we want within our society. Are we to accept that somehow or other the banking crisis of 2008 was caused, as I've said, by the poorest and most vulnerable, therefore must pay the price? Or do we say, sorry, this banking crisis was caused by an out-of-control banking system? This crisis has affected a very large number of people. If instead of cutting public expenditure, thereby punishing the poorest and most vulnerable, damaging the life chances of a whole generation of young people all across Britain, we instead said, no, we're going to do things differently in the future. We're going to have an economic policy that works for all, an inclusive economic policy that ensures there is a change in the approach of the rich getting richer and the gap between the richest and the poorest getting wider and wider. We are already one of the most unequal countries in Europe. The richest 5 families own the equivalent of the combined wealth of a fifth of the rest of the population of the entire UK, and it's getting worse. I think the historic mission of Labour is to do something very, very different. If we're going to rediscover ourselves and take ourselves forward, both as a movement and a party and a society, then I believe we have to challenge some of the things that we fundamentally got wrong. This is the centenary of the death of Keir Hardie. I was proud to write a chapter on the book that's coming out on the eve of the Labour Party conference on his life. He stood up during appalling times. He was a child labourer in the mines. He stood up for women's rights. He stood up with the suffragettes. He stood up for the right of women to vote. He stood up for factory legislation, for safety in work, for trade union rights, for the empowerment of the working class as a whole. What a brave man he was. So sad he died when he did. So it's not a question of us as a movement and a party looking back. It's a question of us learning the lessons of those people that gave up and suffered so much for all of us. And take it forward. Unleash the potential that's there in everybody. Unleash the potential that's there in young people. And face the issues of this world. The issues of environmental disaster, which we can prevent, not individually. You won't do it by free markets. You protect our planet by collective action. By collective action to protect our resources and protect our environment from pollution as a whole. How you go forward for a more equal and inclusive society. How you protect the vital public services. How you be prepared to take some public services, particularly the railways and Royal Mail, back into public ownership. How you go forward on those kind of issues. And it's exciting. People come forward to do that because they're not interested in Yahoo sucks abusive politics. They're interested in how they can mould and develop society in the future. Democracy is complicated, difficult, but very, very exciting. And I feel that some of those people that resort to personal abuse, name-calling and all that are probably a bit nervous about the power of democracy. 600,000 people probably will be taking part in this process over the next month. What is there not to like about that? That excitement, that mandate for change, that mandate for peace, that mandate for economic and social justice, that mandate for real democracy and real empowerment within our society. Thank you so much for inviting me.